And take it away, Robert.
Yeah, so the one that I've been working on. Oh god, the bar's in the way of my tabs. How do you? Oh, there we go. All right. Yeah, so I've been working on this issue, which is ProcessCommitWorker memory allocation problems. And I think this has been partially fixed by some changes that Eagle put in a few weeks back tied to a regex, as in it just doesn't seem as bad anymore anyway. But it's still bad. And one of the, so I started looking into exactly what it does, and it's tied to what this worker gets run every time a new commit is added. So on branch push or anything like that, a new job for this is pushed up. And it runs through a load of things. So I did a bit of investigation on it. And so, yeah, you can see the numbers now. Where is it? Up at the top, it's like 45 billion some things. Bytes? It's in bytes. Okay, yes, I can read. It's very small on my screen. So it's 45 billion bytes, which is something. I'm not going to do the conversion, and it's now only 14 billion. So that's like brilliant.
Massive. Sorry, Robert. Would you mind just stepping back and just so it's every time we do a commit or we push a commit,
yeah,
this is executed. And
yes.
What's it for? What does it do?
It does way too much. It does. Let's I'll go to the file quickly.
Yep.
This one, right? Okay. Everything on Zoom is in the way. It's kind of irritating. Right. So ProcessCommitWorker takes the project, the user that's doing the thing, the commit hash, which is curious as well. That's like a hash of some commit data. It's not like a commit ID. That sort of plays into it a bit later. It then scans the commit message using Banzai. This isn't immediately obvious. It doesn't have any like big Banzai references here. And then you can ignore my change here. Basically what it does is it goes through any mentioned issues that are in that commit message and closes them. It also does some stuff tied to metrics. It creates cross references. So like a note if something is mentioned in the commit. So like if you mentioned an issue or you mentioned another merge request, I believe it adds a little bit of text to it. So it does sort of like three things. It does, however, have a few issues. One of them being that, as far as I can tell, there's no limit on how many issues you can tag in a commit message. But it should be limited by Banzai.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So when you say mentioned, is that like when you say closes issue X?
Exactly. Okay, yeah.
Right. But when you say part of, it doesn't do anything. It's looking for closes.
Yeah, it's looking for closes. That uses a regular expression. That's in part of the Banzai pipeline. The problem with the Banzai pipeline, because my first thought was, well, this looks like it's just loading every single issue into memory at once, and you could potentially mention infinite issues for closure. Could be a problem. It probably is a problem, but I think that the Banzai pipeline timeouts will probably stop that from happening if there was too many mentioned. And also, this isn't a Rails scope. This is an array of issues. They are all loaded at once. So there's no, and I tried to, my first attempt to fix this was to go in and change this to like a find each. It's an absolute nightmare. It's not physically possible. You'd have to change most of the Banzai pipeline. So I gave up on that. So my new solution to maybe help improve this worker is to do this, which is to close the issues in a separate worker.
Mm-hmm.
So for each issue it wants to close, it loads into a separate worker. This is because the actual issue closing does lots of stuff as well. It also can trigger loads of messages to be added in various places, loads of metrics to be updated. And so for every issue, it was also loading even more into memory and then going off and doing stuff. So potentially it could be quite heavy. What's a little bit weird is that there is already a dedicated worker for issues that are closed by a merge request, but not one for closing by a commit. So ultimately, it probably makes sense for them to be kind of generic because it is basically the same job, but it just figures out which one to close slightly differently or has a slightly different bit. So that might change at some point.
Does the other worker belong to source code also?
No, it belongs to code review. So it might explain why we didn't have this in our part of the application. So yeah, my now solution after a reasonable amount of looking into this was is to just do a separate issue as a separate worker. So that's what I've been working on. So I've shifted this here. So for each issue, it now queues a new job to close the issue with the worker. Where it gets bizarre is that this collection of issues isn't a collection of issues. It's a collection of issues and external issues, which cannot be found in the database because they're not in the database. And we don't have any generic way of figuring out which is which. So you're about to see some really nasty writing in the worker where it just does it with a conditional because I couldn't figure out a better way of doing it. And it feels really rubbish. It actually passes the class name through because there is no way of saying like instantiate this issue or this external issue. The ID can be numeric or it could be a string. It could be for any external service like Jira. It's a bit weird. So if there is a better way of doing that, I'd like to know because I haven't figured it out. But yeah, for the moment, it's got a really rubbish conditional in it. So yeah, it basically takes the issue. For the external ones, it can also still do the closing side of it. I stole this logging from the merge request closing one. But yeah, aside from that, it doesn't really do anything very interesting. It takes the commit hash through and it just calls the service in the same way that it was previously called. Well, not quite the same. So here, when this was done, this calls close issue on the service, which bypasses the permission check because it was already performing a permission check here. But in the worker, we need to perform that permission check. So it actually calls execute and it will check the user has permission to do that. So that's the new worker. There's some other oddities I've had to move around to sort of get it kind of working. But that side of it hasn't been particularly awful. Where it gets kind of bad is that the pipelines, it's got less red than it did before. But where it's starting to get quite frustrating is that I have 14 failures in branch push service spec because it has 14 separate tests that expect closing of an issue under different conditions. So and some of them are external, as you can see. So like it's expecting calls to external services, all this sort of stuff. And so I'm a little bit conflicted because I could just delete all those lines of code and say, yeah, it's expected to queue a job, which I mean would kind of work. Or I could run the jobs in line and then still keep these same conditionals so that, you know, it still actually checks that the issues get closed. Yeah, and I haven't really figured out the optimum way of doing that yet. They both feel a little bit rubbish, to be honest, but yeah, there's an awful lot of them. yeah, it's never nice when you see 14 failures in the same file. But yeah, that's where I'm up to anyway. Just keeps going.
The running in line. What's your hesitation on that?
It just feels a bit weird, but I don't think it's. I think that's technically the better option, because at least you've got those expectations that are actually like checking to see if it did the thing that it was expecting it to do. So I think that is probably what I'm just going to do. But some of these tests are a little bit weird as well in the way the expectations are written. So I just need to go through them and paste an additional line in. It's been so long since I've run a sidekick queue in line that I can't remember how to do it. So I was looking for references yesterday. So if anyone's done that recently and knows how to do it, yeah, send me a link, because I haven't found it again yet. But I think it's there almost. I think that's the only and then under coverage. My new most hated pipeline is part of our spec runs now. Alongside RuboCop, I still hate RuboCop as well. But I think that it's mostly about it missing logging. I don't know. It feels really stupid to test logging, but I guess I have to put something in for it. Yeah.
Actually, I think this time it might be helpful, because I think project find will return an exception if the project is not there. So this kind of lines with logger probably not accessible.
Which one? This one?
Yeah, I mean, like project.find. I think if the project ID is not existing, that it will return an exception. So the
okay, yeah, you might be right.
Yeah,
you can just change that to find by ID.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll swap that over. I think because I copied this from the merge request one, I was like, I don't understand why they're using find by ID. I'm just going to use find instead. So that's probably where the change happened. Yeah, so I think that's kind of it, really. If has anyone got any questions on it, or any other suggestions on how to lower memory usage on this worker?
I have one quick note, or maybe just a couple of thoughts regarding the issue type, issue class, and issue ID. Yeah, it's actually reminded me the problem with I guess it's called, not the problem, but the solution. It's called global ID in Rails. Yeah, but I'm not sure whether we encourage using it or not. I sent a link to the chat, and it's actually have an example that, for example, before we had to send the class and the ID, but now with application job we can just send an object and everything works great. Yeah, but I believe we don't inherit from application job, or maybe have some different abstractions. So I think global ID across our database, and maybe it's something that can help us exactly in this case.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Come across that before. The active job is one of those things that I basically haven't used anything new that Rails has added since like version 3, I think, because they went through a period of just adding loads of stuff that I was already using elsewhere, like replacing Sidekick, replacing Carrier Wave, all those sorts of things. So yeah, I've not come across that, but yeah, if we do have a way of using that, that'd be quite nice. That'd make it a bit tidier, because it is a bit,
yeah,
it's a bit naff. And I don't know if there's another option. Like, I don't. Maybe there's other types of these too. I'm not really sure at all. And it's going to be a bit of a pain in the ass to test this as well. So,
yeah. So maybe external issue is not active record. So
yeah, it's not at all.
Then,
the external issue is really, really weird. It's a really basic class that just says, like, it's an external issue and it has this ID, and then it sort of gets hooked into loads of things to like say where it's from. It's a little bit bizarre.
Yeah, then maybe yeah, it's not the solution. But
yeah, I'll have a look at that.
Yeah.
Though. That'd be interesting because I mean this, and I'm fairly certain that RuboCop's going to complain about my case statement or something, as it usually does as well. So I'll yeah, I'll probably have to change it anyway.
About the global ID, are we using active job? I thought we were using just like, you know, sidekick workers without using the Rails active job functionality, or application job, whatever it's called.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that we might have started bringing parts of it in.
Okay.
But even if we're not, you could still use global ID. You can. There is a global ID locator which does that behavior for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sent a link to the code to the best practices, which mentions that we don't use application job or active job, but at the same time there are some entries in the code and documentation about like 2 global ID method. So maybe there's a way to use it, yeah, like separately, without active job actually. So.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think this code, like this change to add this new worker, was of interest to Heinrich as well, by the way, because I was asking some questions in Slack, and I think somewhere else this was going to be applicable to, which could be kind of curious. Basically, with the it's kind of hard to tell with where is it, the closed service. Okay, it's different. First time I've ever actually used that. Oh God, it's on a different application. What? Okay. Yeah, so this closed service does a load of work per issue, which is why it kind of isn't great to have it running in a loop. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference, but it could make a huge difference. It's like, I highly doubt anyone's closing 50 issues at once, but if they do close 50 issues at once, then this is going to cause quite a problem because it does quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I can close to-dos and stuff as well, notifications. I don't even know what perform incident management actions is. Yeah. So there's quite a bit. And I wasn't expecting that when I first looked at it either. But yeah, in theory, it should be better running it in its own worker. Although then that worker will probably have its own memory issues. So, you know, well, that's a problem for future me. You know, that's that guy's problem. He can sort off.
Robert, can you show us the graph again at the start where the memory went down?
Yeah, so this is the original graph. These are taken from is it it's Thanos, isn't it? Or no, Kibana. So yeah, it's from Kibana, these ones. You can get like a Thanos link to it. So this should, in theory, I can't even see the button now. This should generate the current state of it. It is very slow.
Yeah, that's because it's two weeks period.
Yeah.
But we went from 40 something to 14 something. Is that...
Yeah, which either could just be
massive.
that there's less of an issue with it. Yeah, I mean, there was part of me that saw it as currently 14. It's like, right, cool, issue closed. I don't have to do any work. It's been magically solved. But I've kind of felt like the issue closing is probably a bit of an issue anyway, so it would make sense. But yeah, going from 45 to like 14 is a huge change. And it could well be from this thing that Igor mentioned before, which was that he changed one of the regular expressions.
Yeah, but it was only merged today, I guess. Yeah, because 3 weeks ago, but it was awaiting the security release.
Okay.
But it was merged today. So let's see, maybe this one helps. Yeah. But this one is fun as well.
Oh, there we go. The Thanos query doesn't even work. Yes, I know. I have never had any success with that usually. So yeah, I mean, potentially that'll have an effect on it. I think it's probably just down to, if it is tied to the amount of issues that people are closing, like somebody just closing 50 issues, then it will just fluctuate week by week because someone just might not be doing it that week. So yeah, in theory, it might be a bit better, but I do think it makes sense to try and finish the this stuff anyway.
Yeah, it might even be. I mean, you've shown us there's so much happening in the worker as well as what the worker's calling. But yeah, like maybe a first step to breaking it into multiple sub workers, and maybe even trying to align the code with that other job that's in code review.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
it's all big effort, obviously.
Let me see if I can find that quickly. I think it's under merge request issue worker. So yeah, they have essentially the same worker. In fact, it is nearly identical. The only thing it's got that's different is that it passes a merge request instead of a commit, but it is marked as code review. So ultimately, I will, and it's also got a low urgency as compared to the original one, which was high urgency. So that's a little bit of a weird difference, but ultimately I will probably just delete this and just merge it into the other one. It makes sense, and just have it pass in a merge request instead of commit, that sort of thing. I think that makes sense. But now that I know that this probably has code coverage for these logging statements, I'm going to go and steal that next as well, so that I don't have to write that. I feel like that probably makes sense.
Great. Anyone else got any other questions? Thank you very much, Robert.
Yeah, it's not the world's most exciting one.
Well, it's an important job. I mean, it's every commit. Right, yeah. I do have a question. Did you have one, Vasily?
Yes, I have like one question suggestion. I don't know if it was if you tried that, but sometimes it helps to find the exact, let's say in Kibana. So we have a record that consumes like 14 gigabytes of data now. So in some cases we can find the exact file, and if it's like, let's say, if it's like a public repository, then we can take a look, like have like a visual representation of this commit, and we might spot something inside of the commit message. But I think it works only for public ones, so you need to be lucky in this way.
Yeah, I think if I'd seen the numbers still being the same, I would probably have gone and done that. If I can get the same, have they given us a link to that? Yeah, there is a link to that. See what the current numbers are. But yeah, I would have been tempted to do that and to look up exactly what's going on. But it can be, I know, getting access, if it's not a public commit, so if it's a private commit, yeah, it's gone back up again now. See, interesting how much it fluctuates. Yeah, the only problem I've found lately in terms of tracking down stuff on production is that getting production console access is an absolute pain in the ass right now. You have to put in access requests in Slack, I think, and you have to hope that someone from ops sees it, or it times out within like 3 hours, and then you have to do the whole thing again. So yeah, I kind of just preemptively couldn't be bothered with that, but it would be nice to actually find the real commit
Feel
messages.
free to, ping me and I can try and coordinate that. That sounds a bit weird, actually. 3 hours, it's not much time.
I was talking to Vij about it. It might even be less than that. He's been doing it for what's he work on? The customer billing sort of side of stuff, and he had like an entire day last week where he just kept submitting these requests and no one picked them up. So that sounded like a bit of a faff to me.
It sounds like we could improve that process. Sounds like.
I think everyone should just have production console access. Just YOLO it. It'll be fine. What could go wrong?
Any other questions? We're almost at time. Sorry, I do have one final question. We've got like 3 minutes or something, but you mentioned that it takes the hash rather than the commit ID.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's because commits don't exist in the database, and equally because they get read off of disk, it's kind of slow to look them up. So instead of them having just an ID that gets passed around, there's a hash, and it's kind of it's a Ruby hash with like so like a dictionary key sort of thing, so key value sort of thing, with details about the commit. So you can build the commit from those details rather than fetching them off of the disk again.
Okay, we don't have an ID because it's not a database object.
Yeah, and I mean you can look up a commit from the repository, but it's a disk read as far as I know, pretty much every time. So just passing around the hash details is actually quite good in that regard. And so you can do, I think I did it in the specs. There we go. You can do commit to hash, and then you can restore it doing build from sidekick hash, which is something I've half moved. I stole this out of this worker because it has this thing to do with date suffixing. So, and then commit has a from hash. So then I've just turned this into a from sidekick hash and then shoved it into the commit model. So it basically allows you to build the objects from those hashes that are getting passed around. I'm not entirely certain how necessary that part of it is, but it was there before, so I imagine it's there for a reason.
Okay, thanks, Robert. I'll stop the recording now. Stop the recording.